Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nature Explorer. If you love nature, adventure, and timeless stories, you're in the right place. On this channel, we explore some of the world's greatest books about nature, travel, and wildlife, one chapter at a time. So, sit back, relax, and let your imagination wander into the beauty of the natural world. Now, let's continue our journey with today's reading. Letter 4. A Plague of Flies, A Melancholy Charioteer, The Foothills, A Mountain Boarding House, A Dull Life, Being Agreeable, Climate of Colorado, Soroche and Snakes. Canyon, September 12th. I was actually so dull and tired that I deliberately slept away the afternoon in order to forget the heat and flies. 30 men in working clothes, silent and sad-looking, came into supper. The beef was tough and greasy. The butter had turned to oil, and beef and butter were black with living, drowned, and half-drowned flies. The greasy tablecloth was black also with flies, and I did not wonder that the guests looked melancholy and quickly escaped. I failed to get a horse, but was strongly recommended to come here and board with a settler, who, they said, had a sawmill and took boarders. The person who recommended it so strongly gave me a note of introduction and told me that it was in a grand part of the mountains, where many people had been camping out all the summer for the benefit of their health. The idea of a boarding house, as I know them in America, was rather formidable in the present state of my wardrobe, and I decided on bringing my carpet bag as well as my pack, lest I should be rejected for my bad clothes. Early the next morning I left in a buggy drawn by light broncos and driven by a profoundly melancholy young man. He had never been to the canyon. There was no road. We met nobody, saw nothing except antelope in the distance, and he became more melancholy and lost his way, driving hither and thither for about 20 miles till we came upon an old trail which eventually brought us to a fertile bottom, where hay and barley were being harvested, and 5 or 6 frame houses looked cheerful. I had been recommended to 2 of these, which professed to take in strangers, but one was full of reapers, and in the other a child was dead. So I took the buggy on, glad to leave the glaring, prosaic settlement behind. There was a most curious loneliness about the journey up to that time. Except for the huge barrier to the right, the boundless prairies were everywhere, and it was like being at sea without a compass. The wheels made neither sound nor indentation as we drove over the short, dry grass, and there was no cheerful clatter of horses' hoofs. The sky was cloudy and the air hot and still. In one place we passed the carcass of a mule, and a number of vultures soared up from it, to descend again immediately. Skeletons and bones of animals were often to be seen. A range of low, grassy hills, called the foothills, rose from the plain, featureless and monotonous, except where streams, fed by the snows of the higher regions, had cut their way through them. Confessedly bewildered, and more melancholy than ever, the driver turned up one of the wildest of these entrances, and in another hour the foothills lay between us and the prairie sea, and a higher and broken range, with pitch pines of average size, was revealed behind them. These foothills, which swell up uninterestingly from the plains on their eastern side, on their western have the appearance of having broken off from the next range, and the break is abrupt, and takes the form of walls and terraces of rock of the most brilliant color, weathered and stained by oars, and, even under the gray sky, dazzling to the eyes. The driver thought he had understood the directions given, but he was stupid, and once we lost some miles by arriving at a river too rough and deep to be forded, and again we were brought up by an impassable canyon. He grew frightened about his horses, and said no money would ever tempt him into the mountains again, but average intelligence would have made it all easy. The solitude was becoming somber, when, after driving for 9 hours, and traveling at the least 45 miles, without any sign of fatigue on the part of the broncos, we came to a stream, by the side of which we drove along a definite track, till we came to a sort of tripartite valley, with a majestic crooked canyon 2,000 feet deep opening upon it. A rushing stream roared through it, and the rocky mountains, with pines scattered over them, came down upon it. A little farther, and the canyon became utterly inaccessible. This was exciting. Here was an inner world. A rough and shaky bridge, made of the outsides of pines laid upon some unsecured logs, crossed the river. The Broncos stopped and smelt it, not liking it, but some encouraging speech induced them to go over. On the other side was a log cabin, partially ruinous, and the very rudest I ever saw, its roof of plastered mud being broken into large holes. It stood close to the water among some cottonwood trees. A little higher there was a very primitive sawmill, also out of repair, with some logs lying about. An emigrant wagon and a forlorn tent, with a campfire and a pot, were in the foreground, but there was no trace of the boarding house, of which I stood a little in dread. The driver went for further directions to the log cabin and returned with a grim smile deepening the melancholy of his face to say it was Mr. Chalmers, but there was no accommodation for such as him, much less for me. This was truly a cell. I got down and found a single room of the rudest kind, with the wall at one end partially broken down, holes in the roof, holes for windows, and no furniture but 2 chairs and 2 unplanned wooden shelves, with some sacks of straw upon them for beds. There was an adjacent cabin room, with a stove, benches, and table, where they cooked and ate, but this was all. A hard, sad-looking woman looked at me measuringly. She said that they sold milk and butter to parties who camped in the canyon, that they had never had any boarders but 2 asthmatic old ladies, but they would take me for $5 per week if I would make myself agreeable. The horses had to be fed, and I sat down on a box, had some dried beef and milk, and considered the matter. If I went back to Fort Collins, I thought I was farther from a mountain life, and had no choice but Denver, a place from which I shrank, or to take the cars for New York. Here the life was rough, rougher than any I had ever seen, and the people repelled me by their faces and manners. But if I could rough it for a few days, I might, I thought, get over canyons and all other difficulties into Estes Park, which has become the goal of my journey and hopes. So I decided to remain. September 16th. 5 days here, and I am no nearer Estes Park. How the days pass I know not. I am weary of the limitations of this existence. This is a life in which nothing happens. When the buggy disappeared, I felt as if I had cut the bridge behind me. I sat down and knitted for some time, my usual resource under discouraging circumstances. I really did not know how I should get on. There was no table, no bed, no basin, no towel, no glass, no window, no fastening on the door. The roof was in holes, the logs were unchinked, and one end of the cabin was partially removed. Life was reduced to its simplest elements. I went out. The family all had something to do, and took no notice of me. I went back, and then an awkward girl of 16, with uncombed hair and a painful repulsiveness of face and air, sat on a log for half an hour and stared at me. I tried to draw her into talk, but she twirled her fingers and replied snappishly in monosyllables. Could I, by any effort, make myself agreeable? I wondered. The day went on. I put on my Hawaiian dress, rolling up the sleeves to the elbows in an agreeable fashion. Towards evening the family returned to feed, and pushed some dried beef and milk in at the door. They all slept under the trees, and before dark carried the sacks of straw out for their bedding. I followed their example that night, or rather watched Charles's wane while they slept, but since then have slept on blankets on the floor under the roof. They have neither lamp nor candle, so if I want to do anything after dark I have to do it by the unsteady light of pine knots. As the nights are cold and free from bugs, and I do a good deal of manual labor, I sleep well. At dusk I make my bed on the floor, and draw a bucket of ice-cold water from the river. The family go to sleep under the trees, and I pile logs on the fire sufficient to burn half the night, for I assure you the solitude is eerie enough. There are unaccountable noises, wolves, rummagings under the floor, queer cries, and stealthy sounds of I know not what. One night a beast, fox or skunk, rushed in at the open end of the cabin and fled through the window, almost brushing my face, and on another, the head and 3 or 4 inches of the body of a snake were protruded through a chink of the floor close to me, to my extreme disgust. My mirror is the polished inside of my watch case. At sunrise, Mrs. Chalmers comes in, if coming into a nearly open shed can be called and makes a fire, because she thinks me too stupid to do it, and mine is the family room, and by 7 I am dressed, have folded the blankets and swept the floor, and then she puts some milk and bread or stirabout on a box by the door. After breakfast, I draw more water and wash 1 or 2 garments daily, taking care that there are no witnesses of my inexperience. Yesterday, a calf sucked one into hopeless rags. The rest of the day I spend in mending, knitting, writing to you, and the various odds and ends which arise when one has to do all for oneself. At 12 and 6 some food is put on the box by the door, and at dusk we make up our beds. A distressed emigrant woman has just given birth to a child in a temporary shanty by the river, and I go to help her each day. I have made the acquaintance of all the careworn, struggling settlers within a walk. All have come for health, and most have found or are finding it, even if they have not better shelter than a wagon tilt or a blanket on sticks laid across 4 poles. The climate of Colorado is considered the finest in North America, and consumptives, asthmatics, dyspeptics, and sufferers from nervous diseases are here in hundreds and thousands, either trying the camp cure for 3 or 4 months, or settling here permanently. People can safely sleep out of doors for 6 months of the year. The plains are from 4,000 to 6,000 feet high, and some of the settled parks, or mountain valleys, are from 8,000 to 10,000. The air, besides being much rarefied, is very dry. The rainfall is far below the average, dews are rare, and fogs nearly unknown. The sunshine is bright and almost constant, and 3/4 of the days are cloudless. The milk, beef, and bread are good. The climate is neither so hot in summer nor so cold in winter as that of the States, and when the days are hot the nights are cool. Snow rarely lies on the lower ranges, and horses and cattle don't require to be either fed or housed during the winter. Of course, the rarefied air quickens respiration. All this is from hearsay. 8. I am not under favorable circumstances, either for mind or body, and at present I feel a singular lassitude and difficulty in taking exercise, but this is said to be the milder form of the affliction known on higher altitudes as soroche, or mountain sickness, and is only temporary. I am forming a plan for getting farther into the mountains, and hope that my next letter will be more lively. I killed a rattlesnake this morning close to the cabin, and have taken its rattle, which has 11 joints. My life is embittered by the abundance of these reptiles, rattlesnakes and moccasin snakes, both deadly, carpet snakes and green racers, reputed dangerous, water snakes, tree snakes, and mouse snakes, harmless but abominable. 7 rattlesnakes have been killed just outside the cabin since I came. A snake, 3 feet long, was coiled under the pillow of the sick woman. I see snakes in all withered twigs, and am ready to flee at the sound of a shaken leaf. And besides snakes, the earth and air are alive and noisy with forms of insect life, large and small, stinging, humming, buzzing, striking, rasping, devouring. 8. The curative effect of the climate of Colorado can hardly be exaggerated. In traveling extensively through the territory afterwards, I found that 9 out of every 10 settlers were cured invalids. Statistics and medical workers on the climate of the state, as it now is, represent Colorado as the most remarkable sanitary